Welcome to the Governors Summit. We are so thrilled that you guys are here. We're going to have some really excellent conversations this morning. And joining me virtually this morning is Democratic Governor Andy Beshear of Kentucky. Governor, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Good morning, and thanks for having me.
So we've got a lot to cover in a short amount of time. We're going to talk about tariffs and Medicaid and, of course, politics because we are Politico. But first, Governor, you very understandably had to cancel your in-person interview here because of the devastating floods that have hit your state in the last few days. So I just want to take a moment to let you talk a little bit about how Kentucky's doing, how the recovery is going. Just briefly give us a little bit of an update.
Well, we've been hit hard, and we've been hit hard by natural disasters, historic natural disasters, the last several years. In 2021, we had the worst tornado disaster in our history, it killed 81 people. 2022, worst flooding in our history, killed 45 people. And right now, we're dealing with a flood and a snowstorm on top of it that thus far has taken the lives of 14 people. Once again, we have hundreds of Kentuckians whose homes may not have been swept away this time, but certainly have been ruined or have significant damage. So we are once again in that situation where we got to get back up, we've got to rebuild, and we've got to march forward. Thankfully, we have the power back on to most of the state. We've gone from about 40,000 connections out to less than 1,000, which is really good news. We're getting all of our water systems back up online, and all this was important because wind chill is negative 2 or 3 where I am today. So again, Mother Nature hit us with a historic flood, then a snowstorm, and then historic cold. But we're tough in Kentucky. Thankfully, people have rallied, and they've rallied to help, as has the rest of the country and the world. We opened a fund to help our people first to pay for each funeral, because what we do in Kentucky is we mourn together. We don't want any family to be worried about that obligation while they're putting their loved one to rest. That's the Team Kentucky Storm Relief Fund, and we appreciate everybody's help in that. We hope that by the end of the weekend, we'll be out of the worst of it. It's supposed to be about 50 degrees on Monday, and that's going to feel balmy to us after everything we've been through.
Yeah, no kidding. Thank you, Governor. So staying on disaster relief for just a moment here, President Trump has said that the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, has, quote, gotten in the way of recovery. He at the time was referring to the California wildfires, the hurricane that hit North Carolina. I wonder, he's also suggested abolishing FEMA outright and having the states handle disaster relief, and he's also made significant cuts already. How do you think, as somebody who's dealing with a disaster right now, do you agree with his assessment that FEMA, that they should get rid of FEMA and the state should handle it?
I don't. Now, FEMA needs a number of fixes and improvements, but this is the 13th federally declared disaster since I've been governor, over 5 years. I've worked with FEMA a lot. And when you think about a natural disaster, you first have a search and rescue, the emergency phase. And then you have an intermediate housing phase where you got to find a safe place for people to be for a year, 2 years, depending. And then you have the rebuilding phase. FEMA's very good at that first search and rescue phase. They surge in resources. They had multiple National Guards come in to help us. They bring in swiftwater boat teams that help. They bring in extra people to help in our call centers. They're very good at surging resources at that point that you need it the most. I mean, we've made over 1,000 boat rescues and over 300 air rescues since this started, and we couldn't have done that without FEMA's help. That means that FEMA's surging of resources helps to protect lives. Now, the challenge with FEMA is when you get into the later piece, especially when you have individual assistance, when people can get some relief for their loss. And that system is overly complex. Too many people are turned down by it, but a lot of that is what Congress has said to FEMA. It has put some shackles and some difficulties on them about how it's processed. Now, we made some demands in 2022 because our people were hurting and it was way too hard, and we saw some improvements. That doesn't mean it didn't leave a bad taste in people's mouth, but I want you to think about the math. It's this same group, even if they're too tough, that processes these claims for all 50 states when a natural disaster occurs. Now, if FEMA goes away, the requirements by Congress stay. And so all 50 states would have to do that same processing. And that means the overhead to do it, with each state having to do it, would eat up the dollars that are available for our people. So we got to be thoughtful. You know, when something it needs to be fixed, let's fix it. Let's certainly not break it.
Got it. Well, let's turn to Washington and the decisions here that are going to affect your state. About 28% of Kentuckians receive Medicaid. You're the fourth highest out of the 50 states in terms of percentage of Medicaid recipients, according to the Kaiser Family Foundation. On Truth Social yesterday, Trump endorsed the House Republicans' plan, which would slash billions in funding for Medicaid, even though the night before, Trump told Fox News that, quote, Medicare and Medicaid, none of that stuff is going to be touched. So how are you preparing for the possibility that your state could see major cuts? And do you think that there is a realistic probability that this could actually move through the House?
I believe that health care is a basic human right, and that no one should ever have to worry about being able to afford seeing their doctor or taking their parents or their kids to that next appointment. Medicaid and expanded Medicaid not only cover hundreds of thousands of Kentuckians, but they also support a healthcare industry that is critical for our people. Without expanded Medicaid and without a well-funded Medicaid system, rural hospitals close. Doctors and nurses and everyone else lose their jobs. People have to drive multiple hours just to see their regular doctor, much less a specialist. Rural America deserves health care. States like mine deserve health care, and cuts to Medicaid or the national health funding, they put all of that at risk. So my hope is certainly that every congressman or woman and every senator from any state that has a rural health care system would stand up and would stop this. You know, if we're looking to make our workforce more productive, if we want to get people that aren't at work back to work, the idea is to get them healthier, not to cut off their health care.
Are you in touch with any congressional Republicans? What have you said to them about these efforts?
Well, my current discussions are primarily on this natural disaster. Thankfully, our entire congressional delegation has come together to push for more assistance for Kentucky. And let me just say, the Trump administration has worked really well with us thus far. We haven't seen any concerns over FEMA affect us on the ground. But as we move into these other issues, first, we're pushing to undo some funds that are frozen. You know, I see Elon Musk's tech interns or tech bros running around D.C. They may understand AI, but they don't understand funds like AML. Let me tell you what AML is. It's a fund that was created to help Appalachia. Right now, the freeze that's in effect or their refusal to push money out is stopping a project that's bringing clean drinking water to 961 homes in Breathitt County, 650 homes in Hazard, that is repairing rock slides and mudslides that threaten the lives of the people in the communities underneath them. You know, these actions require that people actually know what they're doing, that they learn the people that they might hurt. You know, Kentucky, I think, was the first state called for President Trump. You know, he won by 30 points. Yet a lot of these freezes and a lot of these actions, you know, hurt my people the most. And so when I stand up and I speak out, it's not because I'm a Democratic governor. It's because I'm the governor of the Commonwealth of Kentucky, and I pledge to my people I would do my very best for them every day.
So let's move to tariffs. This is a topic that you've talked a lot about. Trump has delayed his threats of tariffs against Canada and Mexico until next month. But like I said, you've talked about it a lot. Canada is Kentucky's #1 export partner. If Trump's tariffs do go into effect, what, if anything, can you as governor yourself do to potentially work around those tariffs?
It'll be a challenge. We'll do everything we can, but it will hit us, and it'll hit us hard, and it already is hitting the American people. So Kentucky has set export records, actually every economic record. In the last several years, our economy is booming, and this is the biggest threat I've seen to it, aside from the pandemic, since I became governor. We've set export records in back-to-back years, but Canada is about 23% of all of our exports, and we're not alone as a state in those numbers. I believe that Donald Trump ultimately became president because that last group of movable voters thought he would do more to bring down prices. Yet we see inflation going up. We see these threatened tariffs and the ones put in effect, raising the price of gas, raising the price of groceries. If this president continues to focus on the culture war issues and ignores what's happening in our economy, uses tariffs to try to get non-economic concessions, thus gambling the price of everything, gambling on inflation, I think the American people will end up feeling betrayed because they believe that he was less distracted and would do more. But what we've seen thus far is he's doing everything but address prices.
Well, I wonder, have you, given everything that's going on in your state with the floods, communicating on DOGE or even on tariffs and what that might do to Kentucky, have you been able to speak to the president directly about any of these concerns?
I haven't had a conversation directly with the president. I'm hoping to be in D.C. tomorrow for the governor's meeting with the president. I certainly want to engage him and the administration on anything we agree on. Again, that's my job, where we agree and it helps Kentuckians to be supportive, but to stand up when policies would hurt my state. That's, again, just being the best governor of Kentucky that I can be.
Well, since you raised this, the idea of working with the president, that was a question I had for you, too. There is this ongoing debate in Washington whether to work with Trump versus when to resist him. And I've been thinking about this debate, particularly in the context of immigration. We know voters in 2024 were deeply concerned about illegal immigration. And last month, you said you had not received any requests for assistance from federal immigration authorities yet, but you would, quote, evaluate anything and everything of potential requests. So is immigration enforcement an area where you think Democrats should work with Trump and Republicans in this moment?
I believe that border security is national security. And so under both President Trump the first time and President Biden, we answered the call and provided National Guard on a federal mission to the border where they served and served honorably. We have not received any requests to assist on immigration, but understand that those requests could run just a huge swath of what is otherwise speculation. If there is a request to find a fugitive, a violent criminal that we would certainly otherwise be pursuing, yes, that's something that we would certainly help with, and we do on a regular basis anyways. My two biggest concerns, if and when asked, and this has been shared by even some of our biggest supporters of the president in law enforcement, is first, our regular law enforcement or our Guard do not have specific training that ICE agents get on immigration law. I think it's about a 2-month course that they get, and this is a very specific area of law. And so there's a concern there. The second concern is legal liability, is whether they're covered like the federal agents are if there is an issue there. But you can even look at a third scenario that says if the immigration officers are going to do something and we're asked to simply provide some security for the rest of the community so nothing spills over, well, that's something we got to consider too, because everyone else's safety around any operation that they're conducting is really important. So like with most things, this isn't a black and a white issue or a white issue. It's something that we have to look at and analyze as any request comes in.
Well, based on Politico's reporting and other outlets reporting, we do know that the Trump administration is not just targeting migrants who have committed crimes. The White House has even said that they consider anyone who has crossed the border illegally as a criminal. So are there any red lines for you when it comes to immigration? If they were trying to access a school or a church to move through with this, are there any red lines for you in terms of deportations and what Trump is trying to do as it relates to immigration?
Well, I think my and everybody else's red line would be any operation that is unsafe. An operation inside a school that risked violence inside a school, that ought to be a red line for everyone. Those are my kids who are in high school and everyone else's. So my hope is that even in this push that the Trump administration is making, that each individual operation is evaluated for its safety of both the officers and agents involved, but also the broader community around it. And that takes some thought about where and when these operations occur.
Gotcha. So let's turn to politics here for a moment. After the 2024 election, you wrote an op-ed in the New York Times where you said, and I quote, The focus of the Democratic Party must return to creating jobs, to creating better jobs, more affordable, accessible health care, safer roads and bridges, the best education for our children in communities where people aren't just safer, but also feel safer, end quote. So I can imagine if I'm Joe Biden or Kamala Harris reading that essay, wildly gesticulating at their record saying, CHIPS Act, the IRA pumping millions into infrastructure projects, capping the cost for insulin for seniors. I don't want you to look backwards, but I'm curious, given what Harris and Biden had to run on in 2024, and yet still the results that we saw, what must Democrats do differently ahead of 26 and 28 to execute on what you said in that op-ed?
Well, there is a difference in what our officials and the president and vice president were out there doing versus what people heard. There's what you spend the most of your time talking about and bringing people's attention to, and that's critically important. Like I said in that op-ed, for our American families, they wake up worried about their job, their next doctor's appointment, the roads and bridges they drive each day, the public school they drop their kids at, and whether they feel safe in their community. And if you can't satisfy those needs as much as you care about that next issue, you can't get to it. And if a candidate you believe will help you pay the bills at the end of the month, then you may lean towards that candidate, even if you disagree with them on a lot of other things. So I think what the Democratic Party, but I hope everybody needs to do is first, spend 80% of your time there, the way you govern, the way you communicate, and people need to be able to see, feel, and touch these things, these advancements in their lives. When I started my 2023 election, in a state a year later, Donald Trump would win by 30 points. I recognized that while we had the best 2 years for economic development, those jobs were going to take a little longer to come online. So I made sure when I talked about a growing economy, I was standing in front of the largest battery plant on planet Earth that we were building. That's not signing something in the Rose Garden. All right, that's the actual tangible result. And here's something that I think people get wrong. People laugh about ribbon cuttings, but if you look at an announcement, that's the hope. A groundbreaking is the progress, but a ribbon cutting is the reality. So there's this town called Henderson. It's formerly a coal mining town in western Kentucky, and I just barely won it in 2019. But we were able, thanks to an investment by Pratt Paper, put the cleanest, greenest recycled paper mill in the world there. 350 jobs paying almost $40 an hour. And that ribbon cutting was something. 350 of my fellow Kentuckians having really good jobs. We ended up winning Henderson by double digits. And that's because, again, when people believe that you are actually improving their lives and they see it and they feel it, now they'll change the way they vote. And the last two things I'd say is you got to get dirt on your boots. Again, get out there. Show people what you're doing. Talk to them in their own communities. And then we got to talk to people like real human beings. We've sanitized different language so significantly that people don't feel like we're talking to them. That's everything from us now using terms like substance use disorder when someone going through it even calls it addiction, or now the idea of justice-involved populations, which are folks in our prisons and jails where we work really hard to reduce recidivism, to place people in jobs. But those terms, to everybody else out there, it's just, it's hard to communicate when you're not using some normal language.
Gotcha. So are you saying that it was more about the messengers than maybe the message itself?
Well, I think some of the programs, and I think President Biden would say this and was frustrated by it, took too long to get out there, took too long to get those actual jobs up and running. And I think because of the pandemic and some other issues, he wasn't able to get out as much and show his work. I would be at groundbreakings for things that happened under the bipartisan infrastructure law or the IRA, and I'd have the Republican congressmen who voted against it, but they were still there. Why were they there? Because it was showing progress in their communities. So I think it's really important as Democrats that we remind people the why, what's out there, the why something happened, but also just show them that tangible piece. And if I can add on to the last answer, another thing that we've gotten away from is communicating about our why we make certain decisions. So when I vetoed the nastiest anti-LGBTQ bill in our history, and I did it in my election year, I talked about my why, and that's my faith. I believe that all children are children of God, and I didn't want our legislature picking on those children. I wanted them to know that if their legislature was attacking them, that their governor cared about them. But communicating that why, I had somebody the next day that said, Governor, I might not agree with you, but I know you're doing what you think is right. That gives people the grace and the space to disagree, but to still support.
So you are famous for somebody who shows up everywhere. You had Andy Hour, these fireside chats during the pandemic. As you said, you love ribbon cuttings, ground bakings, all kinds of events across your state. Do you think that other Democrats are afraid to go to uncomfortable places, to red areas? Do you worry about the Democratic Party not doing enough of that, not showing up?
Well, I think we need to do more. We had a program in my last election called Red to Pink. It's okay to go somewhere that's not going to flip. It's okay to go, and for me, these are my people, right? The reason that I go isn't an electoral strategy. It's because I'm governor of Kentucky, and I owe them just as much as anybody else. But we've got to be everywhere in America to re-earn the faith of working people. We've got to go where working folks are, and in all parts. And when you bring success to different parts, especially when you bring success to a place where maybe people didn't vote for you, then they start thinking that maybe this is all a little bit bigger than politics, which it is. We get caught up in the back and forth between the R's and the D's, but typically good government is good politics. Success lifts everybody up, and my hope is that after what we're going through, we can get a lot closer to focusing on those 5 key areas. That's where the common ground is. That's where we can apply some common sense. And I think that's where we can make some progress and lower the temperature of this country, because I think people are exhausted about the constant back and forth.
So, Governor, I'll close with this. You won your second term as governor in 2023. You're 47 years old, which I think in politician years makes you a baby. I wonder, do you want to stay in politics after your term as governor ends?
Well, we'll see. What I'd say is I love what I do. I've got 2 years and 8 months to give the very best for my people. I'm vice chair of the Democratic Governors Association this year and chair in 26, where I have 36 races that are so important because I believe Democratic governors are good governors that move their states forward for their people. But I love this country, and I hate to see how divided it is. And as a dad of a 15 and a 14-year-old, I don't want to leave the current state of our country and the current state of politics to my kids and to all of our kids and grandkids. I think we've got a duty to fix the problems that arose during our lifetimes, during our terms of service. And if there is an ability or another opportunity to do that, it's something I'd consider, because, again, my kids and everybody's kids and grandkids, they deserve a lot better than what we're seeing right now.
Well, Governor, it sounds like we're going to stay in close touch with you as you consider all those things. So thank you, sir. We really appreciate this conversation and the thoughtfulness with you brought to those answers.